For 3 years, the only sound that came out of the Whitmore estate after sundown was a child screaming. And the man who lived there, the one who could shut down half of Vancouver's port with a single phone call, couldn't do a single thing to stop it. Julian Whitmore was 41 years old. He had grey at his temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of the same granite as the mountains behind his house. He ran Whitmore Consolidated, a shipping and logistics empire that moved roughly a third of the cargo that passed through British Columbia's coast. Unions deferred to him. City councillors returned his calls on the first ring. The Premier had his private number. None of that mattered at 8 o'clock in the evening when his daughter, Cora, started to cry. She was 5. She had been 5 for 4 months now, and in those 4 months, not a single night had passed without the shrieking. The pediatricians said it was night terrors, complicated by grief. The grief counsellors said it was developmental trauma. The sleep specialists from Toronto said it was sensory dysregulation. Every single one of them had their theories, their supplements, their white noise machines, and their weighted blankets. Every single one of them had eventually stopped returning Julian's calls. The estate sat on a bluff above West Vancouver, glass and steel and Pacific stone, and it was enormous and silent and wrong. It had been built for a family. It was being occupied by a ghost and a man who didn't know how to reach her. That was the situation when Piper Lowe arrived. She showed up on a Thursday evening in November, when the rain was coming sideways off the water and the cedar trees along the drive were thrashing like they were trying to pull themselves out of the ground. She was 27, and she looked younger, and she had a canvas tote bag with a broken strap that she'd knotted back together with a piece of twine. She wore a second-hand raincoat 2 sizes too large, and her dark hair was plastered flat against her forehead before she even made it from the cab to the front door. She was not a nanny. She had never been a nanny. She had been a registered practical nurse for 18 months before the hospital restructuring, and after that she had been a lot of things. Barista, pharmacy assistant, night shift security at a parking garage in Burnaby. And now she was standing on the doorstep of the most expensive house she had ever been within 50 meters of. Because her younger brother Kieran owed $60,000 to the wrong people, and this job paid more in a month than she had made in the last 8. And the agency had told her the position was still open because every other candidate had turned it down. She had not asked why. She was beginning to understand. The woman who opened the door introduced herself as Mrs. Hendricks, the household manager. She was in her 60s, with a silver bob and an expression of exhausted professional sympathy, the kind that comes from watching good people fail at an impossible task repeatedly. She looked Piper up and down with a careful neutrality. "You're the nurse," Mrs. Hendricks said. "I have nursing training, yes. You understand the position is for Cora, the child. Mr. Whitmore is not looking for someone to manage his household. He needs someone who can be present with his daughter at night. I understand. The last 4 people we placed in this role lasted an average of 11 days. Mrs. Hendricks said it gently, as if she were telling Piper the weather forecast. The one before them lasted 3. I am not telling you this to discourage you. I'm telling you because I want you to make an informed decision before you come inside." Piper thought of Kieran. She thought of the voicemail he had sent her 2 days ago, the one where he was trying to sound casual and not succeeding, where his voice hitched in a way that meant he was scared and didn't want her to know. "I'm coming inside," she said. Julian Whitmore did not come to meet her. Mrs. Hendricks brought Piper up the main staircase and down a wide hallway floored in pale oak, past a series of framed photographs that Piper didn't let herself look at too closely. A woman with dark eyes and a warm, open smile. The same woman holding a newborn. The same woman laughing on a boat. At the end of the hallway, Mrs. Hendricks knocked once on a heavy door and then stepped back. "He'll want to speak to you before you meet Cora," she said, and left. Julian Whitmore was standing at the window with his back to the room when Piper entered. The study was full of books and the smell of coffee and the low sound of rain on the glass. He didn't turn immediately. When he did, it was with the slow deliberateness of a man who was used to controlling the pace of every interaction. He looked at Piper the way people look at something they are skeptical of but too exhausted to dismiss. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He remained standing. He walked around the desk and leaned against the edge of it, arms crossed, which she had the impression was a posture he used to signal that this was not going to take long. "You're younger than I expected," Julian said. "I'm qualified," Piper said. "I have a background in pediatric care. I've worked with kids who have experienced loss, and I'm not going to be frightened off by a child having a difficult night. You say that now. I know I say that now. I also mean it." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, exactly, but a slight recalibration, the way a man looks when an answer lands closer to what he was hoping for than he expected. Cora's mother died 22 months ago, Julian said. His voice didn't change. It was careful and even and clearly practiced. Vehicular accident on the sea to sky. Cora was in the car. She was physically unharmed. He paused. She hasn't been fine since. That makes complete sense, Piper said. The therapists tell me the night terrors are her nervous system processing what she experienced. He said, the therapists the way people say the consultants when they've paid a lot of money for advice that didn't work. They haven't stopped. They might not stop on a schedule, Piper said. But they can get better. Julian studied her. What makes you think you can do what 4 other people couldn't? Piper looked at him steadily. I don't know that I can, but I'm here and I'm not leaving, and sometimes that's where you have to start. He didn't answer that. He just nodded once and said, Mrs. Hendricks will show you to your room. You'll meet Cora in the morning when she's... He paused, and something crossed his face that he shut down quickly. When she's herself. Piper's room was small and clean and looked out over the side garden and the dark water beyond. She lay on top of the covers fully dressed and listened to the rain and thought about Kieran, and about the agency's 11-day average, and about the look on Julian Whitmore's face when she said she wasn't leaving. She was asleep when it started. A sound that came through the walls, high and thin and utterly desolate. Not crying, exactly. Something older than crying. Something that hit the back of Piper's brain in a place she hadn't known existed until right now. A place that said, a child is terrified and alone. She was in the hallway before she was fully awake. The door to Cora's room was closed but not latched. Piper pushed it open slowly. The room was full of light, a lamp on the dresser, a night light in the corner, a string of small white lights along the headboard, and in the middle of it, tangled in her duvet on the floor, was a small girl with dark curly hair and her father's jaw, screaming at something that wasn't there. A woman in a grey uniform, one of the night shift household staff, Piper guessed, was crouching near Cora trying to speak to her over the noise. The woman looked up when Piper entered, relief and helplessness in equal measure on her face. Julian was in the doorway. He was in a dress shirt, untucked, which told Piper he hadn't gone to bed either. He watched Piper cross the room, and his whole body was rigid with the effort of not intervening. Piper didn't crouch down next to Cora. She didn't try to touch her or speak to her or get into her field of vision. She walked to the window, which was covered by heavy blackout curtains, and she did something that nobody had thought to do, or if they'd thought of it, had decided was too strange. She opened the curtains. The light in the room didn't increase. Outside, the rain had gentled to a mist, and the city below was a blur of orange and white, soft and diffuse through the wet glass. Not sharp, not alarming. Just there, the world, still existing, still lit, still moving. Then Piper turned off the lamp on the dresser, then the nightlight, then the string of little white lights. What are you doing? Julian said from the doorway. Give me a minute, Piper said quietly, and she didn't look at him. The room went dim, not dark. The city glow coming through the glass kept it from being dark, but soft, gentle, like dawn coming in wrong. Cora's screaming stuttered. She lifted her head from the floor. She isn't afraid of the dark, Piper said, keeping her voice low and even, speaking as much to herself as to anyone. She's afraid of the room. She's afraid of where she is when she wakes up. She sat down on the floor a few feet from Cora, not too close. The lights make it too real, too solid. They make everything look the way it looks in the daytime, when she's supposed to feel safe, and she doesn't, so it becomes wrong. The soft light gives her somewhere to go that isn't quite either. Julian said nothing. Piper was not looking at him. She was watching Cora, who was watching her. Just that. Cora stared at her with huge, swimming eyes. I know, Piper said simply. I know it was really scary. It's okay to have been scared. Nobody had said that to her before, or if they had, not quite like that, not as a simple fact, with no attempt to fix it or explain it away. Cora made a small, broken sound that was not a scream. It was something smaller and more honest than a scream. Piper held out her hand, palm up, and waited. After a long moment, Cora put her hand in it. Julian Whitmore stood in the doorway and did not move. He had not moved in what felt like several minutes. His hand was pressed flat against the doorframe, and he was watching his daughter's breathing slow down, watching the rigid lines of her small body soften degree by degree, and his expression was the expression of a man who had expected to be disappointed, and instead was watching something he didn't have words for. Piper didn't sing. She didn't have a lullaby. Nothing came to her. Instead, she talked. She talked in a low, meandering voice about nothing in particular. The rain on the glass, the lights of the North Shore, the way the fog looked on the mountains in the morning, and Cora listened with her eyes half closed, her hand still in Piper's. It took 23 minutes. Then Cora was asleep on the floor, and Piper carefully moved the duvet over her and didn't let go of her hand until the grip had relaxed completely. When she finally looked up, Julian was gone. She found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. He was standing at the island with a mug of something he wasn't drinking, staring at the counter. He looked up when she came in. "She's asleep," Piper said unnecessarily. "I heard." A pause. "She hasn't done that in..." He stopped. "She hasn't done that, not in a long time." Piper nodded. She went to the kettle and filled it and switched it on, moving carefully in someone else's kitchen. "You should know," Julian said, "that I've had your background checked. The agency sent your file this afternoon." "I assumed," Piper said, "your brother, Kieran Lowe." Piper turned around. "He owes money to some people in Surrey." Julian said, his voice was neutral. $60,000. Is that why you took this position?" She looked at him. There wasn't any point in lying. "Yes, that's honest," he said. He picked up the mug and put it back down without drinking. "I'm not judging you for it. I hired 5 people before you. The first 4 left because the job was too hard. You took it because you had no choice. In my experience, people who have no choice are often the most reliable." He paused. "I also want you to understand that I know exactly why you're here, which means I'll know if anything changes." It was a warning dressed as a statement. Piper had been warned before. "Cora is the reason I'm here," she said, "but she's also the reason I'll stay." Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, almost to himself, "She hasn't let anyone do that. Not since." He stopped. He looked away. When he looked back, the moment had closed over like water. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Hendricks will go over the daily routine with you in the morning." He walked out of the kitchen without saying good night, which Piper was already beginning to understand was simply how Julian Whitmore moved through most interactions. Not coldly, just alone. She drank her tea standing at the window, watching the rain. Morning was kinder than the night had been. Cora was quieter in daylight, watchful and precise in the way of children who have learned to monitor their environments carefully. She was small for 5, with her mother's dark eyes and a serious mouth and a habit of carrying a particular worn stuffed rabbit everywhere she went. She did not speak to Piper at breakfast. She looked at her a great deal. At 10 o'clock, she brought the rabbit over and placed it in Piper's lap without explanation, and then went back to her blocks. Mrs. Hendricks, who was passing through, stopped in the doorway and looked at the rabbit in Piper's lap, with an expression that Piper couldn't fully read. "She hasn't given Bumble to anyone," Mrs. Hendricks said quietly, "not once." The next 2 weeks were careful and small. Cora spoke more every day, in fragments at first and then in full sentences, and she asked Piper questions constantly in the way of children who have decided someone is trustworthy and are now stress-testing the theory. Why is the ocean salty? Why do dogs dream? Why does nighttime feel different from daytime? Piper answered all of them with complete seriousness, which seemed to be what Cora was looking for. Julian was present in the way that busy, guarded men are present. Physically in the building, emotionally somewhere harder to reach. He came home late most evenings. He asked Mrs. Hendricks for reports. Once or twice Piper caught him standing in the hallway outside Cora's room after the girl had fallen asleep, just standing there with his hand resting on the doorframe, not going in. He had not managed to put Cora to sleep himself in more than a year. Piper saw this and said nothing about it. On the 18th night, the night terrors came back hard. A bad one, the worst since Piper had arrived. Cora came out of it screaming so loud that Mrs. Hendricks came running from the east wing. Julian was there in under a minute, standing in the doorway in a jacket he clearly hadn't taken off yet, and for the first time Piper saw the fear on his face stripped of everything he usually used to cover it. She got Cora calmed, the soft light, the low voice, the held hand. And afterwards, when Cora was asleep again and Piper was in the hallway with her back against the wall, catching her breath, Julian was still there. "She said something," Julian said, "before you came in. She was saying a word, over and over. I couldn't make it out. Piper had heard it. She was saying the song," she said carefully. She was asking for a song. Something moved across Julian's face. "What song?" "I don't know. I was hoping you might." The silence between them was the kind that has weight to it. "Her mother used to sing to her," Julian said finally. "At bedtime. The same song every night, an old French-Canadian folk song. Catherine's grandmother taught it to her, a song about a river and the moon." He paused. "I don't know the words. I never learned them. Catherine never wrote them down, and I never thought to ask," and then he stopped. "And then it was too late to ask," Piper said quietly. "Yes." She looked at him. He was looking at the floor. "I could try to find it," Piper said. "If you can remember anything about it, the tune, any words at all, I could try." Julian was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he began, very quietly, to hum. It was rough and uncertain. A man who clearly did not think of himself as someone who hummed things, stumbling through a melody that his ears remembered better than his voice did. But it was there, something old and minor key and rolling, like water moving over stones. Piper's breath stopped. She knew that song. She didn't know she knew it until she heard it, but the moment she heard it, something in the back of her mind opened like a door that had been closed for years. Her grandmother, her father's mother, who had come from Quebec to Alberta when she was young and never quite stopped being from somewhere else, had hummed that melody in the kitchen. Piper had been 5 or 6, sitting on the counter eating apple slices while her grandmother made bread, and the sound had been so much a part of that specific warm flower and window light feeling that she had never separated it from the memory itself. She hadn't thought of it in 20 years. "I know that song," Piper said. Julian stopped humming. He looked at her. "My grandmother used to sing it. She was from Rimouski originally. It's an old folk song. It's called something like La Lune sur l'eau, I think, or something close to that. The moon on the water." Julian stared at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. It was not suspicion exactly. It was something more complicated than suspicion. "How does a woman from Rimouski end up being the grandmother of a nurse from Burnaby who ends up in my house?" he said very slowly. "Knowing my dead wife's lullaby." "I don't know," Piper said. "But I do know it. Sing it," Julian said. "Now." "The door is open," he said. "If she hears it." Piper went back to the doorway of Cora's room. She stood in the soft-lit dim, and feeling slightly ridiculous and also strangely certain, she began to sing. Haltingly at first, because the words came back in pieces, the way things come back when you haven't thought of them in a long time. The melody was clearer than the words. But the melody was what mattered. The sound was strange in the hallway of a glass and stone house in West Vancouver. Too old for it, too rough, a kitchen song, a river song. But it moved through the air like something that had been looking for the room it belonged in. In the bed, Cora stirred without waking, and then very quietly she stopped moving completely. Not the stillness of terror, the stillness of something found. Julian was behind Piper. She couldn't see his face. "Keep going," he said, and his voice had lost its careful evenness entirely. She kept going until the words ran out, and then she hummed the rest. And by the end of it the house was so quiet she could hear the water below the bluff. She turned around. Julian had his back against the wall of the hallway with his eyes closed and one hand pressed over his mouth. And for a moment he was not a shipping magnate or a grieving widower or a man who controlled things with phone calls. He was just a person in too much pain who had just heard something he thought was gone. Piper said nothing. She went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and gave him 5 minutes. When he came in, his face was arranged again, but not completely. "Who are you?" he said, not like an accusation, like a genuine question. "Piper Lowe," she said, "from Burnaby. My grandmother was Marguerite Coté before she married, and she used to sing when she made bread, and that's everything I know about how I know that song." "Marguerite Coté," Julian repeated. Something shifted in his expression. "My wife's grandmother's maiden name was Coté." The kettle boiled. They stood in the kitchen on opposite sides of the island and looked at each other, and the coincidence was so large and so specific that it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like the plot of someone's life, working itself out. "That's not possible," Piper said. "It's not impossible," Julian said. "It's unlikely. There are a lot of Cotés from Quebec. It might be nothing." But they both knew, in the way people know things before they have proof of them, that it wasn't nothing. It was the week after that when everything came apart. Julian's assistant, a man named Conrad Stead, who had been with the company for 6 years, and who Julian trusted implicitly, came to him with a security flag. A breach in the estate's visitor access logs. Someone had queried the layout of the residential wing of the estate from an internal terminal. It was Conrad's own access code. Conrad claimed he had been with a client in Calgary the day the query was logged. He was telling the truth about Calgary, which meant someone had his code. Julian told Piper on a Tuesday morning, and the way he told her was with the same flat-voiced control he used for everything. But she had started to be able to read the difference between Julian controlled and Julian frightened, and this was the second one. "Someone accessed the floor plan of this house," Julian said. "The residential wing. The wing where Cora sleeps, but this happened 9 days ago." 9 days ago, Piper said. "After I arrived. I noticed that too," Julian said. He looked at her. "For what it's worth, I have already ruled you out." "How?" "Because the query happened at 11:42 in the morning, when you were in the backyard with Cora building a snowman, and Mrs. Hendricks and I were both watching from the kitchen window." Something that was almost a smile. "Almost. You're a very thorough snowman builder. Who has access to Conrad's code besides Conrad? That's what I'm trying to find out." Julian stood up and walked to the window. "I have people looking into it. What I need from you is simple. You don't leave Cora's side. You don't open the door for anyone who hasn't been cleared by me personally. If someone you don't recognize comes to the door, you take Cora to her room, you lock it, and you call me." "Okay," Piper said. "And Kieran," Julian turned. "What about him? Is he safe? If someone is trying to get at Cora through me, Your brother is fine, Julian said. I had the debt purchased 2 weeks ago. Piper stared. You what? The people he owed money to were compensated. His debt is cleared, you didn't tell me? No, Julian said. It wasn't necessary for you to know immediately. What is necessary for you to know now is that Kieran is safe, and whatever was holding that debt over your head is gone. He paused. Which means you're not here because you have to be anymore. You're here because you choose to be. He said it with his usual flatness, but she heard the question in it. I know, Piper said. I choose to be here. He nodded. He looked away from the window. Good, he said, and that was all, and it was enough. Cora's morning snack was apple slices with peanut butter, which she ate at the kitchen island, while doing the puzzle she'd started on Sunday. It was a Tuesday. Piper was at the counter cutting more apple when she heard something that stopped her hands. A sound from the pantry. Small and fast, like a drawer sliding shut. The pantry door was slightly ajar. It had been closed when Piper made breakfast. She set down the knife slowly and moved to put herself between Cora and the pantry. Hey, Bug, Piper said, keeping her voice at the same easy pitch she always used. Can you take your puzzle to the playroom? I want to check on something in the pantry. Cora looked up, and she was 5, but she was perceptive, and something in Piper's voice made her small face go still. Are you okay? I'm totally okay. I just need 1 second. Can you take Bumble and go to the playroom for me? I'll be right there. Cora picked up the rabbit. She looked at the pantry. She looked at Piper. Then she slid off her stool and walked to the kitchen doorway, but she stopped and turned around. Piper, she said. Yeah, I don't want you to go away. Piper's chest tightened painfully. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Go to the playroom. Cora went. Piper opened the pantry door. A man she had never seen before was standing among the dry goods. He was young, maybe 30, in dark clothes, and he held up both hands the moment the door opened and said, I'm not here to hurt anyone. Then what are you doing in the pantry? Piper said, keeping her voice level through effort. I need to talk to Whitmore, the man said. My name is Patrick Stead. Piper stared at him. Conrad, whose login was used to access the house plans. Conrad, who didn't do it, Patrick said. Someone's setting him up. They used his code to get the layout, and now they're going to use it to pin this on him and use the accusation as leverage against Whitmore. He was speaking fast, the way scared people speak. I found out 2 days ago. I tried to reach Julian directly, but his security team blocked me because my last name is Stead, and right now that name is radioactive to anyone in his orbit. He looked at Piper with the exhausted eyes of someone who has been trying to get someone's attention for too long. You're the one he trusts right now. I need you to get me in front of him. Piper looked at Patrick Stead in the pantry for 5 long seconds. Then she pulled out her phone and called Julian. He was there in 11 minutes. Patrick Stead sat at the kitchen table, and Julian sat across from him, and Piper stood by the counter in case either of them needed to be removed, which she was aware was slightly absurd, but also made her feel better. Patrick talked for 40 minutes. Julian listened without interrupting, which was the particular Julian Whitmore form of intensity, entirely still, entirely focused, his hands flat on the table. When Patrick was done, Julian asked 12 very precise questions, none of which betrayed any emotion at all. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that Piper didn't fully follow. Because it was partially in terse business shorthand, and partially in what she thought might be a brief switch to French. And when it was over, he looked at Patrick and said, Go home. Don't use your phone until I call you. Patrick left. Julian sat at the kitchen table after he was gone and rubbed his face with both hands, which was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. Someone inside the company, he said. A senior VP named Fletcher, who's been moving company logistics contracts to a competitor. He needed leverage over me to keep it quiet. The plan was to manufacture evidence against Conrad and use the threat of exposure, the security breach, the access to Cora's floor plan, to keep me from looking too closely at the financials. He dropped his hands, the implication being that if I caused problems, the breach would be publicized in a way that would look like I was unable to protect my own child. Piper let out a slow breath. He was using Cora as an abstraction, as a pressure point. Julian's voice was perfectly level. He was never going to touch her. He's not stupid enough for that. But the threat of it, the suggestion that she was vulnerable, was enough. And now, Julian said, I have enough for his termination, an internal investigation, and a call to my lawyer that will keep him occupied for the next several years. He looked at Piper. Conrad was never the problem. I believed his brother. So did I, Julian said, which surprised her. He looked like someone telling the truth. In my experience, that's surprisingly rare and therefore notable. He stood. He stood close enough that Piper could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself together with precision and effort. You could have opened the pantry door and run, he said. Cora was in the kitchen, Piper said. You still could have run. I'm not a runner, she said. Julian looked at her. He was close enough that she was aware of his height and the steadiness of his gaze and the slight roughness of his voice when he said, I know that now. The investigation moved fast. Fletcher was escorted from the building by end of week. Conrad's name was cleared. The story did not make the news because Julian Whitmore was the kind of man who decided what made the news, at least in the circles that mattered to him. Julian's sister arrived from Toronto that weekend. Her name was Philippa, and she was 10 years younger than Julian and had their grandmother's same blunt directness. And she took one look at the situation. Cora sleeping through the night, Julian showing up to breakfast instead of leaving before 7. Piper trying very hard not to be noticed, and her face arranged itself into an expression that was clearly going to become a conversation later. The conversation happened in the kitchen on Sunday evening after Cora was in bed. She knows the lullaby, Julian told his sister. It was not the full story, but it was the version he seemed able to say out loud. Philippa looked at Piper. Cote, she said. Your grandmother was a Cote, yes. From Rimouski, Catherine's great-grandmother was Genevieve Cote, also from Rimouski. Philippa pulled out her phone with the brisk efficiency of someone who has already been thinking about this. I looked it up when Julian told me. There's a marriage record in the Rimouski Parish Archives, 1923. Genevieve Cote and a man named Aldrich Lowe. Piper went still. Lowe, she said. Your family name, Philippa said. Your grandmother was Marguerite Cote Lowe before she dropped the Cote when she moved west, because she wanted to be English-Canadian and not French-Canadian, which was something people did. Philippa put her phone on the table. Your grandmother and Catherine's great-grandmother were sisters, which makes you and Catherine, she did the mental math with the speed of someone who has already done it. Second cousins, once removed. The kitchen was very quiet. She wasn't a stranger, Julian said. He wasn't speaking to Piper exactly. He was working something out. She wasn't someone who wandered in from nowhere. She's kin. He said the last word like he was testing the weight of it. The song was in our family, Piper said. Both sides of it. That's why I knew it. That's why Cora recognized it, Julian said. Not because she'd heard it from you. Because she'd heard it her whole life from Catherine and it lived in her somewhere. And when you sang it, he stopped. She found her way back to something safe. Piper finished. Julian looked at her. It was a long look, the longest he had ever held her gaze without looking away. And she didn't look away either. And the feeling was like standing at the edge of something large and realizing you're not afraid of it. He didn't say what he was thinking. He wasn't ready for that. But he took her hand, briefly, just a moment, just his fingers closing over hers and then releasing, and he said, thank you, for all of it. It was not everything, but it was the beginning of everything, and they both knew it. 6 months later, the estate on the bluff above West Vancouver was different. It was not a different house. The stone was the same, the glass was the same, the cedar trees still thrashed in storms, but the hallways had sound in them now. Cora's voice asking 14,000 questions a day, Philippa calling from Toronto and monopolizing the kitchen phone on Sundays, Mrs. Hendricks humming tunelessly to herself when she thought no one could hear, and at night, most nights, the estate was quiet. A real quiet, not the held breath kind. The kind that means everyone inside is resting. Piper was not a nanny anymore, technically. She was not precisely an employee. The exact category of what she was to the Whitmore household was something that was still being quietly worked out between two people who were both careful and a little afraid and doing it anyway. But Cora had stopped asking if Piper was going to leave. The fact that she had stopped asking told you everything. On a Thursday in April, when the rain had finally stopped and the mountains were sharp and clear above the inlet, Julian stood at the door to Cora's room after she'd gone to sleep and Piper stood next to him. Cora was curled on her side, Bumble under her chin, breathing in the slow way that meant she was deep under. No terrors. Not tonight. Julian put his hand on the doorframe, which was where his hand always went. But then he moved it, and he put his arm around Piper's shoulders instead, and she leaned into it slightly, just slightly, the way you lean into something when it feels like it might hold you. She's going to be okay, Piper said quietly. Yes, Julian said. He wasn't just talking about Cora. Piper looked at the sleeping child, at the gentle dark of the room, at the soft glow of the city below the window. She took a breath, and in the quiet, she began to hum. Just a few bars. The old river song, the song that had crossed from Rimouski to a trailer in Alberta to a glass house on the Pacific coast, the song that had come home. And in the house on the bluff, the last of the ghosts went still. And finally, after so long, everyone slept in peace.